My name is Alec Rawls. I've been working with Tom Burnett Sr., father of Flight 93 hero Tom Burnett Jr., to stop the Park Service from planting a giant, Mecca-oriented crescent on the Flight 93 crash site. I often get asked how I discovered the numerous Islamic and terrorist memorializing features in architect Paul Murdoch's Crescent of Embrace design. It was easy. The terrorist memorializing features all point to each other. In particular, the 44 inscribed translucent memorial blocks, or panels, that will be emplaced along the flight path form a kind of terrorist memorializing yellow brick road. Any entry point to this terrorist brick road would have done the trick. I began with the Mecca orientation of the giant crescent. 2 days after the winning Crescent of Embrace design was unveiled in September 2005, the pseudonymous Etouin Sherdlu posted a graphical demonstration that the giant crescent points very close to Mecca. Such an alarming piece of information obviously needed to be fact-checked, and I was one of a half-dozen conservative bloggers who took up that fact-checking charge. We all found the Mecca orientation claim to be correct. Jonathan Haas at the Politicalities blog analyzed the orientation numerically instead of graphically, finding that the crescent points less than 1 degree north of Mecca. My contribution was to refine this calculation. The orientation of the crescent is given by its center line. That's the red arrow in this image. I found that a person standing between the most protruding tips of the crescent structure and facing into the center of the crescent would actually be facing almost 2 degrees north of Mecca. How does this lead to the 44 glass blocks? When I was plotting the center line of the crescent, I noticed that the memorial plaza that sits roughly in the position of the star on an Islamic crescent and star flag does not sit exactly in the position of the star on an Islamic flag. Most Islamic flags are based on the Ottoman flag, which places the star on the center line of the crescent. Notice that the Sacred Ground Plaza, circled in black, is not centered on the center line of the Crescent of Embrace. Instead, the crescent bisector passes through about the top third of the plaza. Here was a repeating theme. Murdoch had created an almost exact crescent and star configuration to go with the almost exact Mecca orientation of his giant crescent. Were the slight imprecisions in Murdoch's Islamic symbol shapes intended to maintain deniability? If Murdoch was that nervy, perhaps he was nervier still. Maybe he had included some separate structure in the top third of the Sacred Ground Plaza that is centered on the center line of the crescent. It was just a matter of looking. Here are the design images for the Sacred Ground Plaza. Zooming in, this uphill view shows the memorial wall coming down from the right along the flight path. Notice that there is a gap in the wall with a separate upper section of wall extending up to the right. A second image shows the view from the upper end of the two-part memorial wall. At the bottom of the page is an elevation view. This is how the Sacred Ground Plaza will look from inside the crescent. The right side of this image is up the hill from the crash site, towards the upper crescent tip. The separate upper section of memorial wall seems to occupy about the top third of the plaza. To see whether the upper section of wall is actually centered on the bisector of the giant crescent, we have to locate the upper section of wall on the overhead view. To do this, notice that the gap in the wall is marked trail. This trail is visible in the overhead view. Shown here in purple, the trail starts up by the parking lot above the upper crescent tip, meanders down outside the mouth of the crescent, then comes through the memorial wall from the rear. The separate upper section of memorial wall continues above the opening for the trail. It is highlighted here in aqua. You can see just by looking that this upper section of wall is centered on the bisector of the Crescent of Embrace. That puts it in the exact position of the star on an Islamic crescent and star flag. Now take a look at the notation for that upper section of memorial wall. Wall with inscribed date. That would be September 11th, 2001. The date goes to the star on the giant Islamic crescent and star flag. The date goes to the terrorists. The separate lower section of memorial wall contains 40 translucent marble blocks, inscribed with the names of the heroic passengers and crew. Plus the 3 with the 9/11 date makes 43. There were 4 Islamic terrorists on Flight 93. Given the mounting evidence that architect Paul Murdoch was out to memorialize the terrorists, I thought he might have found a way to place one more glass block somewhere along the flight path. Again, it was just a matter of looking. At the upper crescent tip, where Murdoch describes the flight path as breaking the circle, sits a huge glass block that dedicates the entire site. This is the 44th translucent memorial block on the flight path. It marks the terrorists' circle-breaking, crescent-creating feat, to be inscribed, a field of honor forever. Note that the giant entry portal wall, which follows the arc of the crescent at the upper crescent tip, continues for another 100 feet beyond the point where the flight path symbolically breaks the circle. Remove the symbolically broken off part of the wall and, as you can see in this animated graphic, the end of the entry portal walkway becomes the most protruding point of the remaining structure. The end of the walkway is where the 44th block resides. This is the true crescent tip, the one defined by the architect's thematic explanation. It marks the tip of the unbroken part of the circle, the giant Islamic-shaped crescent that is symbolically left standing in the wake of 9/11. How much different is the orientation of this true thematic crescent compared to the full Crescent of Embrace with the symbolically broken off parts included? A little less than 2 degrees. Sound familiar? That's how far the full crescent structure points north of Mecca. To find the center line of the true thematic crescent, connect the giant glass block at the upper crescent tip to the last red maple at the bottom. The perpendicular bisector of this line points exactly at Mecca, as closely as can be determined given the pixel resolution of the graphics. That is, to within about 1/10 of a degree. Again, seeming imprecision masks hidden Islamic precision. By using the 44th block to define the exact Mecca orientation of his giant crescent, Paul Murdoch ties his terrorist memorializing symbolism together with his Islamic symbolism to create a perfectly formed crescent of bin Ladenist embrace.